Hello, thanks for joining me again today. I am making a card today to share with you, and I'm starting out with some Color Splash watercolor sheets, and I have my bloom palette there. I'm going to be using the Rustic Rose liquid color, and I have a large blending brush as well as my media mister that I'm going to be working with. A little bit of water just in one of the wells of the palette. And then I'm going to drop just a single drop of that liquid color into the water, and then again on the next piece over in the palette, I'm putting just a single drop in there. So I mixed up that color, and now I am spraying the watercolor paper just to get a nice wet surface to work on. So I'm dabbing this watercolor onto the surface, and because it's got all that water on the surface, it's just spreading out and softening that color quite a bit. So I'm actually going to take my heat tool. Once I get this to the point that I like it, I'm going to take my heat tool and I'm going to partially dry this paper. Now, by partially drying this paper, I get rid of that wet surface. So when you saw the watercolors kind of bloom out and spread out through all that water, partially drying that surface means that they're not going to bloom as far. So as I come back in with this additional color, the color stays more concentrated and a little bit darker. It doesn't move as much on the paper. So I'm going to dry that again, and I did spray just a little bit of water on there because I did want to soften the edges just a bit. And now I'm partially drying it again. And coming back in with some more color, just concentrating that right in the center of that paint bloom that's there. And I decided here to squeeze some water out of the water brush and just mix it up to a much lighter version, just so I could, again, take away one of the harsh lines that I saw, and partially drying again. So now I'm going to dip straight into the straight liquid color, and I'm not actually dipping my brush into the water there. I was squeezing a little bit of water into the bristles just to make sure that the bristles were wet. And then I'm holding the brush horizontally over the watercolor paper and tapping on it to get that splatter effect. So you can kind of mix this up a little bit. The more water that you put with it, the softer that splattering is going to be. And when you go straight into the liquid color, it's going to give you a really strong pigment. So now we're going to let that dry. And then once it's dry, I'm adding a little bit of sparkle silk to it. Now this is the magic in the bottle. You tap it over the top of your project just like we did with the liquid color before, but this adds a whole lot of shimmer and shine to your project, and it's just a really pretty effect that you get from that. So I'm setting that aside to dry for a little bit while I work on some of the other elements for this card. And I have a piece of whipped cream cardstock here. And this is the baby envelope die, and this makes the most adorable little envelope with it. So I'm pulling out my platinum machine, and I'm going to go ahead and die cut this envelope very quickly. I love that that machine folds up. It makes it so much easier to store because it doesn't have the platform down. So that die actually embossed lines in it, and I'm folding in the two sides, the two smaller flaps first, and then I'm folding down up the bottom flap, which is one of the larger flaps on there. I'm not going to fold down the top flap. I'm going to leave that where it is. And right here, I'm just measuring that out because I'm going to put an insert inside of it so it looks like something's coming out of it. So I'm cutting some Rustic Rose cardstock down, and I'm actually cutting two pieces from this. First I'm cutting here is the mat that's going to be behind the watercolor piece, and then I'm going to cut down the piece that's going to be the insert for inside the baby envelope. Double checking my measurements. You can never measure too many times when you're doing something like this. And even with that second measurement, I did wind up, and you'll see here in just a minute, grabbing my shears and trimming down the side just a hair because it was just a little bit too wide still. So I did cut that to be full length from where it's sitting in the envelope. The reason being is because it would sit in the envelope a little better once it was adhered down that way. So I'm using the mini greetings stamp set, and I just stamped my sentiment right there at the top of the paper, and I'm heat embossing that with copper embossing powder. And I did get a little off camera here. My camera is set up directly over the top of my surface, but my eyesight is not real great. So sometimes I have to move things just a little bit so I can actually see them because my head doesn't go over the top of it. So I'm using a little Journey craft glue to just glue that inside the envelope, and then I'm going to use the same glue on the flaps just to glue the flaps down into place. I have a little bit of corrugated stock there, and I just cut a little strip of that. It's about 3/4 inches tall. And then I'm also cutting a piece of the Rustic Rose cardstock again to have another strip with it, and that is a 1/2 inch tall. I'm trimming down my watercolor, and I'm showing you I actually trim it down after I've watercolored because that gives me the ability to trim off any edge that has any harsh color. So when the watercolor kind of pools against the edge of the cardstock, I have the ability to cut that piece off, or at least the majority of it off, if I trim it after the fact rather than doing it before I actually watercolor. So I've trimmed some little ends on those banners, and I'm just kind of laying it out, making sure how I want it. I was going to use the craft glue, and then I decided to grab the white liner tape instead and use that. So burnishing it in, and then I'm just going to adhere that over the top of the Rustic Rose piece, and then I'm going to attach that whole piece onto my watercolor paper. So I'm going to attach that down, and then I'm going to grab my shears, and I'm just going to cut that little excess that's hanging off the edge of the paper down so that it's not hanging off anymore. I'm going to mat that on this Rustic Rose piece that I cut earlier, and I am using white liner tape. I find that it gives me the best adhesive qualities when I'm doing it with watercolor paper because it's such a strong adhesive. The watercolor paper is a little bit heavier than normal cardstock is. I kind of struggled a little bit today to get it lined up the way that I wanted it, but eventually I do get it. And then I'm just using, again, some more white liner tape because it was handy, and I'm going to attach this to a whipped cream card base. It's a top folding card base. Now right now our cardstock is on sale, and I actually stocked up on my whipped cream because I tend to use it for my card bases quite a bit. I will usually go through when I get a new package, and I will cut about half the sheets of the paper into card bases and about half to be card fronts, which gives me stamp panels as well. It's kind of handy to have them already pre-cut. I added a couple of foam squares there to the baby envelope, and I'm just attaching that a little offset onto my card, so it's a little bit of an angle just for some fun. And then I'm going to go ahead and add some pearls to this, just to add a little bit more of a different texture and some dimension as well. And that's going to be the card for me today. I hope you enjoyed it. It's very simple. I love those liquid colors because I think they give such a beautiful watercolor look. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Much love to you all, and have a great day. Bye.